Madam Speaker, I rise to speak in response to the speech from the throne. First, I want to thank the people of River Heights who elected me, who I have the great privilege of representing and working on behalf of every day. I'm grateful and honored to be able to work for and on behalf of the people who live in River Heights. The residents of River Heights care about and are always active in the community. I want to acknowledge the human infrastructure in River Heights, the amazing teachers at our schools, and the people in our community who work and volunteer in any number of professions, contributing every day to the well-being of Manitobans. It is in this context of helping others that I want to speak. 4.5 years ago, in the most costly flood of Manitoba's history, there were numerous people who were evacuated from the shores of Lake Manitoba, from homes around Dauphin Lake, from a substantial area in Brandon, but most particularly from 4 communities in the Interlake: Lake St. Martin, Little Saskatchewan, Dauphin River, and Penematang. I was in Lake St. Martin the day people were being evacuated. People were lined up to get on a bus outside the health center and the temporary band office. They were told to bring a few belongings and to expect to be gone from their community for 2 or 3 weeks before they'd be able to return. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, it is now 4.5 years later, and almost all are still evacuated. Children are going up displaced without ever knowing their own community. It is very similar in Little Saskatchewan First Nation. Indeed, we must ask why it is that in 4.5 years at Little Saskatchewan First Nation, not even a single house has been built. More specifically, why even in this year, no house has been built yet. The community has worked hard to prepare a plan. They had a plan for the development of an area in their community on high ground. This plan was ready in September of 2014, more than a year ago. Instead of quickly implementing the plan, the provincial government has delayed and delayed. Using the community as a ping-pong ball in debates with the Harper Conservative federal government over one small detail or another, with the result that as of today, the tender has not even been put out yet to build the houses. In but one of the many slow and tedious rounds of discussion, in September of this year, the plans were ready and just needed to be approved. But instead of making the situation of the people of Little Saskatchewan a priority, the provincial government waited for more than 2 months to even get back to the leadership in the First Nation. Mr. Speaker, 2 months in the life of this government may not be much, but 2 months in the life of people who are evacuated is a long, long, long time, let alone 4.5 years. Every single step of the way, this provincial government has delayed. 3 weeks ago, the Premier said he was working on it. 3 weeks ago, the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs said the tender for the construction of the houses would be out the next week. But 3 weeks later, we are still waiting. This is terribly unfair treatment of the people this NDP government chose to displace by redirecting the floodwaters to their community in the first place. It has been shocking that this provincial government did not put top priority on the evacuated and displaced people of Little Saskatchewan First Nation. And now the snow is here, and much of the opportunity to build houses in optimal weather conditions is gone, and the situation is still not addressed. Those houses should have finally started construction in April or May of this year. Indeed, Madam Speaker, those houses really should have been built starting in April or May of 2012. Madam Speaker, the situation must change. We need a new government, a Liberal government in this province. Never again must a community be neglected in this way, desperate and displaced for so long. And I still can't believe it has happened and is still happening here in my province in Manitoba. The NDP government, in its inaction, has demonstrated that it has forgotten many other Manitobans as well. We have today more than 10,000 children who this NDP government has displaced from their families and their homes. Almost every day we have Manitobans camped out and protesting in front of our legislature, telling this NDP government that it's time to support children and families in a way that keeps families together. Almost every day in the legislature, the NDP government talks about supporting families. And yet, every day we have people protesting and speaking to the fact that the government is not listening and not paying attention to the realities of people's lives in this province. Mr. Speaker, it is not as if valid models of how to better support families do not already exist. In 1989, the people of New Zealand who were seeing their families being broken up, like the current NDP government is doing Manitoba, they said enough is enough. The government there passed legislation which mandated that families must be empowered to have input through a family group conference before the state had a right to even consider breaking up families. Individuals like Diane Redsky and others at Mama Wichita have taken the initiative themselves to use family group conferencing and demonstrated its benefits during a Maori visit last week. Yet this NDP government dawdles and drags its feet on implementing system and funding changes to use this model throughout the whole province. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, at the Nisawayashiki Cree Nation, Felix Walker and his team at the Family and Community Wellness Center have demonstrated that they can use an integrated service model which is highly effective in supporting families and which has reduced the number of children taken away from their families into the care of foster parents or group homes by 34% over the last 2 years. Madam Speaker, such clear evidence, yet this NDP government will not bring in changes to enable the widespread use of successful approaches like this. Instead of a real commitment, the government in its throne speech paid mere lip service yet again to the importance of supporting families. For 2 months now, an immigrant family torn apart by this NDP government has been protesting in front of the legislature. Madam Speaker, this is an immigrant family who came from a war-torn country for a better life here. This is an immigrant family who were seen to be exemplary in their own community. This immigrant family has been strongly supported by many, including the doctors who've looked after them and those who employed them, but certainly not by this NDP government. This government is not listening to the struggles and the distress of immigrants like these who come to Manitoba seeking a better life. Madam Speaker, we need a new government, a Liberal government in this province. This NDP government talks about looking after our environment. And yet, just recently, an eminent report produced by Sea Choice has taken a careful look at the NDP performance and found it lacking. Indeed, they have concluded that the fisheries on our Great Lakes, Lake Winnipeg, Lake Manitoba, and Lake Winnipegosis are among the worst managed fisheries in the world. Madam Speaker, today's NDP government has let the fishers of our province down, and it has let Manitobans who are concerned about our environment down. The report did not say that the NDP government fell a little short of ideal. The report did not say the NDP were doing a bad job. The report said today's NDP government is among the worst in the world. And we should understand why this is. For many years, the NDP have known that Lake Winnipegosis was being poorly managed. They are responsible for it. I have repeatedly raised this issue many, many times in this legislature, but the NDP never listened. And then, in 2011, a technical report was produced which outlined the problems in NDP fisheries management on Lake Winnipeg in detail, showing it was not up to today. And the report provided a step-by-step addressing the problems and improving the management. But the NDP in the 4 years since did nothing to address the issues. Indeed, the NDP have steadily reduced personnel in the fisheries branch and removed the director of fisheries. The result is that the fisheries branch, which used to have about 90 people in the 1980s, now has about 11 positions, and not all of those are filled. We have a premier who has publicly been said to demonstrate the same anti-science sentiment and distrust of science and evidence that was shown by the former Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Scott Forbes has said it in the Free Press. The neglect of the NDP for fishers and for those concerned with the environment is shocking. Indeed, it is unbelievable. Madam Speaker, we need a new government, a Liberal government in this province. In health care, thankfully, Manitoba is not quite the worst in the world like our fisheries management is, but our emergency room waiting times are among the worst in Canada. In many areas of mental health care, there are long waits and poor access, if any, and yet the NDP do not act. Manitoba Liberals will act and will include critical psychological services like those for postpartum depression, for autism, and many more under Medicare. Madam Speaker, we need a new government, a Liberal government in our province. In education, the legacy of the 16 years of NDP government is post-secondary education students with extraordinary high levels of student debt. This has put many students at a disadvantage during their years in post-secondary education and continuing from the day they graduate. Manitoba Liberals will address this by changing the provincial portion of student loans from loans to non-repayable grants. Manitobans students need this change and want this change. They have been calling on the government for this change for years. Madam Speaker, we need a new government, a Liberal government in our province. There are many other areas where a Liberal government will deliver effective solutions in 2016. These include improved management of infrastructure problems and projects, phasing out the PST paid by municipalities with a rebate program, covering in vitro fertilization under Medicare, removing the PST from children's sporting goods, exempting first-time home buyers from paying land transfer tax, addressing the high prices and poor choice of liquor in this province, improving access to ride-sharing while treating our vital and important taxi drivers fairly, bringing effective programs together and filling in the gaps to reduce family and interpersonal violence through education, and improving democracy by bringing in proportional representation. The lack of attention by the NDP to other critical areas is also apparent. The poor performance of our manufacturing sector since 2007 is just one example. While manufacturing sales in Saskatchewan have grown rapidly, manufacturing sales have slumped and stalled in Manitoba. And in the very latest month of available data, September of this year, manufacturing sales are still below the level of October 2008, 7 years ago. The NDP government have just not understood how to best support and foster the growth of manufacturing in Manitoba. Connected to the decreased level of manufacturing sales and to the lack of opportunities for businesses in Manitoba, we have more people leaving Manitoba than coming to our province, particularly our young professionals. Indeed, the out-migration of people from our province is very telling. Madam Speaker, we need a new government, a Liberal government in our province. And what is the NDP answer to the travails of Manitoba? It is to lock as many people in our jails as they possibly can. Indeed, our jails are full to overflowing, and strikingly many of these have not yet even been tried, let alone sentenced. The cost of the NDP approach is staggering. The loss in human potential that could result from decreasing recidivism and helping people to correct their mistakes and become productive citizens is enormous. Once again, a better way is already evident. The NDP have not put a priority on the drug treatment court. Not only are we still awaiting the program expansion to Brandon and Thompson, but there was no access to the program available for any new intakes for about 15 months. The NDP are less interested in rehabilitating people and more interested in putting more and more people in our jails. Such a hardline approach also smacks of a recent but no longer standing Conservative federal government, Madam Speaker. We need a new government, a Liberal government in our province. Mr. Speaker, under the NDP, the desperately needed attention to those who are living in poverty has fallen short. Food bank use has increased faster and on a per capita basis is higher than in other provinces, reflecting the lack of focus on poverty here. Only this week's Campaign 2000 Child and Family Poverty Report was released to show that Manitoba has the highest rate of child and family poverty of any province in Canada. Sadly, the NDP record falls far short of what would have and should have been expected. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, we need a new government, a Liberal government in our province. There is much more I could say, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, Madam Speaker, I do want to make one more point, and that is this, that it's time for whomever is government in Manitoba to put greater trust in Manitobans to make good decisions. We should trust municipalities to make good decisions instead of putting municipalities in a straitjacket as to what they must spend on. We must trust Manitobans to make good decisions on how they spend their own money. We should trust Manitoba businesses to make good decisions on how they spend their money and how they contribute to our province. Manitobans want and deserve greater freedom and greater trust than we've seen under this government. Manitobans want a government they can trust and a government that will trust them. Madam Speaker, we need a new government in this province, a Liberal government. And now I will conclude. Manitobans no longer trust the NDP to provide real solutions or to achieve the substantial changes that are needed in our province. Indeed, Manitobans no longer see the NDP as a credible government for our province. Madam Speaker, we need a new government, a Liberal government in our province. Thank you.